Oh no! It's the beginning of the month and your tenant hasn't paid their rent. What do you do? So I've talked to several people, lots of people that as new landlords they're faced with this situation for the first time, and it was so stressful for them. They didn't know what to do. They talked to the tenant, and it just went badly. The tenant, well, it kept them up at night. The tenant wasn't communicating. The tenant was lying. All these different situations and scenarios. And once the situation finally resolved, either the tenant left or they paid their rent or somewhere in the middle, they just threw in the towel. They said, "I never want to do that again. It's not worth it. I need my rest. I gotta sleep. It was interfering with my other job, my family, and they sold their rental." And anyway, don't make that mistake. Okay, real estate investing is far too valuable to throw in the towel. There's just a better way to do it. First of all, there's some things you can do to help prevent late rent. Um, the first thing to do is, of course, do proper screening. See my previous blog post about getting good tenants, how to screen for them, and how do you need to handle an application from a prospective tenant. Um, Another thing to do is write out your step-by-step process of what you're going to do if you are faced with late rent. Um, I can't stress how important it is to write it out. Don't just have it in your head, have an idea. Write it out, because in the situation, in the heat of the moment, you need to be able to look at it and know what you do. You can get confused. You can not have a clear vision of where you're headed to, or where you've been, or where you're at. Have your steps written down, and we'll cover some of those steps here. Um, and uh, and also have a resource or some knowledge in place of how to evict somebody. So for me at Kasteel Property Management, we have the most awesome attorney that we refer evictions to. Evictions are rare; they don't come up very often for us, but when they do, we just turn it over to the attorney when it gets to that point, and they take care of it. So it's you need to have a resource like that. Or maybe less preferable is your own knowledge of how to do it. But unless you're doing this full time, you need to have a good resource, somebody that's well experienced in it. And if you're doing your job, it's going to come up so rarely for you to do an eviction that laws change, practices change, judges view things differently from year to year. You really don't want to have to face this once every few years, or even less often, because it'll be a completely different process every time. So just have a good resource in place to handle those things. Okay, now some other things you can do to help prevent late rent. So we'll get to what to do when you have late rent, but right now, what to do to prevent it. Um, when a new tenant signs up, make sure they understand that there is always a late fee. Okay, no exceptions. So I do this in a couple of ways. First, of course, it says it in the lease agreement, but I emphasize it when after they've signed up, I send them a welcome letter, and the welcome letter, of course, gives them some general information, things that they need to know, but it also emphasizes in there is always a late fee. And I explain, rent is due on the first, it's late on the second. It is late on the second, but there's no late fee till after the fifth. Now, a lot of people take that and just mean, oh, okay, I can pay rent until the fifth. And that's totally fine if they want to do that. I don't care. But there is always, always, always a late fee after the grace period of the up until the fifth. And then there just is. There's always a late fee. And let's see. And also in the welcome letter, I make sure and explain to them, if you know you're going to be late, right? I've never come up with a situation or that somebody is surprised that rent was due, and they're surprised that they weren't going to be able to pay it that month. right? That just doesn't happen. People know, oh, my paycheck's falling on this day instead of that day, or I had this other big expense, whatever. People just know, right? And they always know that rent's due. And so I tell them, you need to send me an email before it's late, before it's late, telling me, hey, I'm not going to get rent paid until, the 8th, and I'll pay the late fee. And as long as they're communicating, and as long as they're keeping their promise, and as long as they pay their late fee, then problem resolved, right? That's what we want. We just want things to go smoothly, and I make sure they understand there is still a late fee, and you still need to pay it. But thank you for communicating. Um, and be firm. There's no exceptions. There's no exceptions to the lease agreement, and there's no waiving of late fees. I've even had, just a quick story, I've had ecclesiastical leaders call me and say, hey, I'm going to pay the rent for your tenant, but I don't pay late fees, so you'll need to waive the late fee. And I I tell them, I appreciate you wanting to help, and I respect your generosity in helping there. I said, but I can't waive late fees. I especially can't waive late fees at the request of a religious organization, um, because that is a protected class, right? So if all of a sudden I'm going to waive late fees because of one person's religious affiliation, then I have to waive late fees for every person's religious affiliation, right? So that's a protected, federally protected class. You can't do that. You need to be consistent, and so I tell the person, I say, well, I respect that, and I explain why I can't, and I say, but I'm not charging you a late fee. I'm charging the tenant a late fee. So anything you can do to help them out, in paying even a portion of their rent or whatever will help them out. And of course, they're most interested, and they just don't want the person to get evicted. And so I tell them, I'm not going to evict them over an unpaid late fee. As long as the rent's been paid, and they eventually pay that late fee, and they get caught up and they're working on it, then I'm not going to evict them just over $100 late fee or whatever the case is. So anyway, that usually helps them feel better, and they understand where I'm coming from, that I'm not just some mean landlord trying to be mean. And let's see, just remember too, your actions today based on how to handle the late fee today will determine how they treat late fees in the future, how they treat late rent in the future. So be firm, stick to your process, and move on, and they will, stiffen up and realize, well, this is real. I can't just push them over, and I got to make sure I take care of this next time, because that late fee was pretty expensive. I don't want to do that again. So now that we've gone over some things to do to prevent late rent, what do you do when there is actually late rent? First of all, again, charge the late fee, right? In my process, that's right on the 6th of each month, you charge the late fee. Because I've prepared my tenants, they've usually at that point communicated with me, like I explained beforehand, and they tell me that they're going to have the rent paid, and then we're done. Unless, of course, they don't follow through with their promise, then we move on down the process more. Now, but when they have not communicated, okay, the 6th comes, rent's late, I haven't heard from them. So that morning I send an email that says, hey, where's rent? Remember, you're supposed to communicate beforehand if you're going to be late. You need to pay rent today, and you need to communicate with the office right away. And a lot of times that solves problems. Oh, sorry, I forgot, this or that happened in my life, and I logged in and paid the rent right now. And sometimes they'll ask, is it okay because I was never late before? Can I get the late fee waived? And I explain, no, I can't, for all the reasons I've already explained. And that's the end of it. Now, if they don't respond to the email and they still haven't paid rent, by about 2 o'clock that same day, I send them a text. It says basically the same thing. Where's rent? Remember, you're supposed to tell me. You're supposed to give me some advance notice. You can't just let this be, and otherwise I have to assume the worst. So So that's about all I do on the 6th. On the 7th, the very next morning after the late fee was charged and after they got that communication attempts from me, the very next morning I come into the office, check my email, have they replied? Have they paid their rent? Nothing happened. Then I go out there and I post a 3-day pay or vacate notice on their door, or hand delivered if they're home. And, some people might say, whoa, really? On the 7th of the month, you're already delivering a pay or vacate notice? And the answer is yes, absolutely. And in fact, my attorney might even say that's even not fast enough. But the reason you want to do it quickly is for a few different reasons. One, it lets them know you're serious, and that does usually spur some communication at that point. Two, it's only a few weeks away before the amount they owe doubles and rent's due again. So you don't have much time before this situation becomes twice as bad, and which is bad for them as much as it's bad for you as the landlord. Also, if it does get to the point of eviction or the eviction process, there's so many delays and warnings and things built into that legal process to give them chance after chance after chance and plenty of time to resolve it in one way or another, whether they move on their own accord or whether they figure out some kind of payment, that you don't want to add your own delays to that process. The process is already long enough. And I don't mean that by saying it's too long. I mean, literally, it's long enough. They will have several weeks, sometimes up to 5 to 6 weeks, at least here in Utah. And that's, other states, a lot of times it's even longer. So, there's plenty of time there for them to figure out a solution. Don't add your own delays to that process. Move quickly. Now, if I've delivered that pay or vacate notice and then they call me or email me and say, oh, hey, sorry, I should have communicated sooner, but blah, 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 blah. This says 3 days, but I won't be able to get it taken care of for 5 or 6 more days. Is that okay? The answer is no, sorry, it's not. I wished you had communicated sooner. That would have been better for both of us. But a process has now begun that I can't undo, right? I can't just ignore that a 3-day pay or vacate's been delivered. And, I let them know at the end of that, it's turned over to the attorney. And at that point, if they haven't paid or vacated, they'll need to just work it out with the attorney, including the extra attorney fees and costs. That's usually very motivating for them. And again, realize you're not being cruel at this point, right? You're not being unreasonable. You're not being unfair because you've tried and tried and tried and prepared them of how to handle this properly, and they just didn't, right? They've driven it to this point. And to now give them more chances, just again, prepares yourself and them for failure, whether this time or next time. So you just, hey, sorry, consequences of your actions, basically. But we're in the process now, and there's a timeline. So I hope you can work it out because that'd be better for both of us. But it's really up to you. The process has begun. Now that doesn't mean, if they don't get it paid or vacate within 3 days, that doesn't mean that they actually get evicted. Like I explained, there's a whole process to that. And that can take, some time. But the attorney handles that. The few times that it's actually gotten to that point, for me, sometimes the attorney even still works it out before they get evicted. And they're able to get everything paid and they're able to stay in the home. And, that's a great resolution. We just want things to be back on track in one way or another through the proper method. Okay, so some things to avoid when dealing with this situation. One, something very easy to do that you can even do by accident is never agree to let them be late. So this can happen mainly a lot of times if they're even trying to be responsible, and they'll send you an email before they're late and they say, hey, I'm going to be late this month. Is that okay? Do not respond and say yes. Because suddenly you're agreeing to something different than what's in the lease. Okay, you don't want to say yes. The fact of the matter is, it's never okay to be late. Okay, when they ask me that, I simply just respond, say thanks for letting me know. I'm not working with them. I'm not making special rules or exceptions for them. They still get a late fee. It's all still exactly the same. I'm not going to agree with them that it's okay. I'm not going to tell them it's okay. It just is what it is. So if they really press me for an answer, am I going to get evicted? Will this be okay? Are you going to be able to help me out? Then I just explained to him exactly what I said. It's never okay to be late. But as long as you're communicating, communication is key, right? As long as you're communicating and following through with your promises, then I will believe you. But I cannot agree to something different than what's in the lease. So you'll still have a late fee. You're still at risk of the consequences of being late. But your communication is a big help and will help you a lot too. And we'll just plan on you following through with your promises. You can say it like that, but let them know what their real standing is. So if things start to get hairy with the tenant, maybe they want to argue with you, or they're lying, or they're don't engage in too much conversation with them. There's really no point. For one, it gets you riled up, gets you emotional. It does the same to them, and that really doesn't accomplish anything. Plus, a lot of times it causes more damage, more problems. So just don't engage in too much conversation, just the minimal amount needed. If they want to start yelling and screaming at you when you deliver the pay or vacate notice, then let them and walk away, right? The more you say, the more you could be held responsible for. Let their actions do all the talking. You don't need to give them additional fodder or additional ammo. I mean, and I mean that in a figurative way, of course, in what they can use to complain against you or say about you. You just follow your process and the legal process. Don't be afraid to move forward. I touched on this some before. The legal process has has its own delays and chances and opportunities for them to get things back on track. So don't be afraid to move forward. That just causes more delays on the built-in delays that are already there. Don't get too anxious. You don't want to go ahead of the law. If needed, the law will dictate when it's okay for you to go in there and change the locks and remove their stuff and how to do that. Don't go ahead of the law. You hear crazy situations sometimes where landlords will change the lock, where they will literally remove their stuff from the property or whatever. And there's a right way and a wrong way to do that. Just don't get ahead of the law. Know the process. Again, that's your homework to do before you even rent to a tenant. You need to know those steps. Or, of course, use Kasteel Property Management and you won't have to worry about it. A little plug there. Let's see. Don't withhold repairs. That kind of goes along with the previous thing. You don't want to withhold repairs. You want you want everything on your end to be right, to be perfect, right? If it ends up going to court or evictions, you want everything, all of the problems to been very lopsided on their side. They didn't pay rent, being the main thing, right? You just want it to be that clean cut. They didn't pay rent. You don't want to add to it that you were yelling at them, that you haven't been taking care of these repairs, that the place was unlivable, that you didn't keep your promises, that blah, 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 right? Keep up on your responsibilities. If there's a repair that needs to be done, do it. Even more so in a situation like this. Something to kind of throw into there as a side note: never hire a tenant to do repairs on a property. If you're in a situation like this with an eviction and they've been responsible for some repairs in the past, maybe there's been some arguments about whether the repairs went as they should have, or whether they were paid as much as they should have, or whatever, it really, really complicates the situation in an eviction. And now a judge has way much more to sort out, and it's much, much less likely to go in your favor. Just don't hire a tenant to do work. Don't rely on them to take care of maintenance and repairs and things like that. Let's see. Don't negotiate more than 3 days. We already touched on this a little bit. Just don't do it. Okay, if the 3 days pay or vacate notice was delivered, stick with it and explain to them why, and they need to sort it out. Never ever waive a late fee. Again, I can't emphasize that enough. Don't waive a late fee. Again, these are the things to avoid doing. Keep your emotions in check. This goes along with don't talk too much to them. Getting upset and arguing with them doesn't do anything productive, and it usually makes things worse. Okay, so sometimes it's easier to take care of a problem tenant if they're a problem. But what if they're not a problem? What if they're nice? What if they're a sweet old lady? What if they're a single mom? What if they're sick? Or what if they lost their job? There's a number of really unfortunate and tough situations to deal with that are interfering with somebody's ability to pay rent and live up to their obligations, no matter how much they want to. Those situations can be a little bit more difficult, but there's still a right way and a wrong way to do it. The right way, of course, is you can be kind, you can be understanding, you can be helpful. And part of the wrong way to do that would still be to deviate from your process. Okay, you never want to deviate from your process, because you can get in trouble by giving some people special treatment as opposed to others. And so be kind, be helpful. Usually, again, if you've done proper screening and you have good tenants, you're working with generally sensible, reasonable people, and they'll come to you and tell you, hey, this happened in my life. I'm not going to be able to fulfill my lease anymore and pay the rent, and we're just going to have to move. And they'll usually be apologetic or whatever, and they'll just explain it to you like that. And you know what? That is for as terrible of a situation that is, that's pretty good, and that works out a lot of times in those tough situations. That's generally how I see it go. They'll come to you beforehand, and as long as they're planning on moving out in a reasonable time, a lot of times they'll say, we'll plan on being out by the end of the month, and we'll try and do it sooner. Then there's no reason to move towards eviction and cause them more hassle and more costs and things like that. Just they're communicating, which is key, and they're following through with their promises. Then let the situation play out. So of course you got to watch it closely, make sure they're not taking advantage of you and just feeding you lies. Make sure that it's actually progressing and that's happening. But you can usually tell. So there's some things you can do, though, to still make the situation even better for them and for you. I always tell them, like, I'm sorry to hear about your difficulties. I hope things can work out well for you. I want to help you as much as I can by helping you sell your lease. If we can, especially if you're still tied to a lease and we can get somebody else in there quickly to start paying the rent, then that releases you from the rent that they're paying. And, let's see if we can do that. And then you work out with them how to coordinate showing of the property while they're still living there. And so you can start advertising it right away. And like I said, with their cooperation, you should be able to get somebody lined up pretty quickly. And then that helps them out, of course. And also tell them, I'd also like to be able to give you back as much of your deposit as possible, hopefully all of it. Here's a list of some things that people generally miss when moving out, some things that their deposits have deductions for. So, give them some cleaning tips, some, light fixtures, cleaning the baseboards, walls, whatever, kind of put together a list of commonly missed things and give that to them. When you behave like that and you give them those helpful tips and some things, they're usually grateful and want to be helpful because you're trying to be helpful to them too, without just giving away the farm, right? You don't need to sacrifice your financial security and the well-being of your rental property to be nice to somebody that needs some help. You can still be nice and protect those things for yourself. But they know they can't live there if they can't pay rent, and they're already formulating some ideas in their head. But again, if they're not communicating, you don't know any of these things, and you just proceed down your process. And if they don't communicate, then that's unfortunate, and that's on them. But there's really nothing you can do about it. You just move as quickly as you can to get your things back on track. So anyway, you can do this. You don't need to throw away the rental property because of a stressful moment. Maybe you've already had that situation where you're deciding, holy cow, I never want to do this again. That was so terrible. I had 3 months of no sleep because this tenant never paid rent and I didn't know what to do. And, I was yelling at them, they were yelling at me, and I have a whole chain of text messages back and forth between the two of us. And they wronged me in this way, and their argument is flawed in that way. And, all those things. And you're probably even justified in what you're thinking and saying. But there's just a better way. One, you've learned your lesson. Now get prepared for the next time so it doesn't have to be that way. Stay tuned for more tips and information from Kasteel Property Management. And if you're interested in our services, we cover Utah County in Utah, and I'd be happy to help you with your investment needs. Thank you.